All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon session. This is a study session on in anticipation of our final budget. So I think.
Okay.
Good afternoon. This is a little different for me. Usually we just go into final budget hearings, so it's kind of like a preview of coming attractions, I guess. And this is really an over-level view of what you'll receive in your packets that we're delivering to you for next week. And that has much more detailed information. We tried to put this together to give you an idea of what we're looking at final budget as you read through the material and have any questions. So, we'll get right into it. We'll do, as I said, we're looking at a preview of the 09-10 final budget. We'll take a quick look at general fund revenues, the appropriations, a little bit about Prop 1A securitization, just a brief overview of the non-general fund budgets, and take any questions and answers. So as you know, the fiscal year-end close, the auditor's office completed that year-end close at the beginning of August. And at that time, we sent out the instructions to all the departments regarding preparation for final budget. What we requested was only technical adjustments, and that means if they knew of grants they were going to receive or revenues that were going to either go up or go down, and associated expenditures. It was technical adjustments only. We also asked them not to deal with the salary and benefits that were associated with negotiated agreements with the public safety bargaining units and with the cost associated with the delay of the layoffs. If you recall, in the proposed budget, there were a number of layoffs. They were budgeted to be laid off at the beginning of the year. They were not laid off until 3 pay periods into the year, so we had to deal with those associated costs. And our office took the lead in calculating those and put those back into the budget. So what you'll see in your packet and what we'll be talking about on next Tuesday is a balanced 2009-10 final budget. The total of all funds is $146 million. That's an increase from proposed of nearly $5 million. Now, most of that is attributed to non-general fund. It can be because of cash carries was higher than expected. It could be additional funds received. There's a lot of reasons why, but the vast majority of the increase in the overall budget is in non-general funds. The general fund budget is a little over $58 million, which is an increase of less than 0.5%, 0.4% from proposed. It's an increase of $234,000. Now, when you look at it as compared to fiscal year 08-09 final budget, and you pull out that $20 million that is related to the bond transfer for jail construction, we're looking at an 8.9% decrease. But remember, we had a substantial contingency going into 08-09.
So surely the 58 then, taking out Measure J, would then be 38. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So again, just to review, our cash carry at year-end close was $183,542, which when we prepared the proposed budget, we tried to be very prudent, and we did it with a zero cash carry. So right there, we gained a little bit of money. Our revenues are at a little over $59 million, with appropriations at $58 million, general fund contingencies of $200,000, and a transfer into the general fund reserve of $759,000. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go along. So what are some of the things that occurred in the revenue side? Well, if you'll recall, at the proposed budget, we based our revenues on a decrease in the assessed rolls of 5%. When the rolls closed, they closed with a decrease of 3.31%. I believe in the budget memo it says 3.41, but it was actually 3.31. Since then, roll corrections have put it over 3.9%, and we feel it's prudent to maintain pretty much the levels that we had at proposed budget, because those roll corrections are ongoing. One of the big impacts and more concerning was the decrease to supplemental secured property taxes. Recently, the assessor's office notified us that the supplementals went negative, and when I heard that, the color kind of drained from my face, and we took a hard look. The auditor's office, the assessor's office, and the CAO's office met and looked at those numbers and adjusted them to where we feel is at a reasonable and safe level. The unitary tax did increase by over $100,000. The property tax admin fees that are tied to your secured and unsecured property taxes declined because the supplementals declined. The sales tax in lieu fee, which was part of the whole triple flip, declined. We received notification from the state last week that had gone down $224,000. The good news is our projections for sales and use tax and the public safety, state public safety, which is Prop 172, are running right on the money so far this year. I mean, it was, the sales and use tax was to the penny after 2 months, which kind of just blew my mind. There's an increase for the Homeland Security Grant for 910. There are prior year grant revenues that we did not receive, expenses incurred in 08 or 09 that we'll be receiving in 910. There's a number of different ones related to CalMet to under OES and environmental health, I believe all had grants revenues that will be coming in this year. There's a closeout of number designated funds. We were looking at, we met with the auditor's office to look at some of the designated funds that we have had on the books for a long time with no activity and no real purpose anymore. And we'll be bringing to the board a package of about 4 or 5 of those designated funds. Some have as little in them as $82, others around $16,000 or $14,000. And we're bringing those to the board and moving that money into the general fund. Of course, the sheriff's contribution of AB 443 funds in the tune of $347,000 is part of that bargaining agreement that was reached with the public safety units, and the board's direction to keep an additional $107,000 of VLF funds in the general fund. In your board packets that you have for next week, there is a list of all the technical adjustments by general fund, non-general fund, and special districts and enterprise funds. And it lists what all those line items are individually. So what I'm trying to just touch on is some of the bigger issues. One thing now, in looking at appropriations, the state 50% growth decreased, so we gained a little money there. One of the big items is the liability expense line item. This is in the insurance budget, and every 2 years normally we do an actuarial, and it tells us what our funding levels should be. We did one last year. HR risk management determined that we should do another one this year out of the normal 2-year cycle, and because of what the actuarial told us where we should be funded at, we've increased that line by $204,000. Again, the layoff delays, and we needed to put another almost $130,000 back into the budget. We put in not only for the delay of the 3 pay periods, but under the new regs, the COBRA benefits, the county is liable for 65% for 9 months. So we put that into the budget as well. We carry forward, we didn't increase the board projects, but we carry forward any unspent funds from 0809 into 910, as has been the board's direction in prior years. And those are funded with VLF funds. There are capital assets. There are 2 copier printers. The one in the sheriff's office has died, I think, a slow, terrible death. It worked to death. And the one in the mailroom is also beyond its life limit. That funding comes from transfers through the duplication fund, a designated fund. We charge back departments for every copy each copy they make, and we charge a little bit more than the copies actually cost. The excess money goes into the duplication fund to replace the cost of the copiers. So we do the paper, the toner, and we also do the cost of the machine depreciated. So we can replace those when they need to occur. We had to increase the general fund transfer out of county fire by $53,000 because the normal fees, permits that we use to fund that department, as well as property taxes, were not enough sufficient to meet the expenses. And the expenses are not that great, the greatest of which is the CDF dispatch contract. And we may be needing to come back to the board and talk to you about charging out the calls to the different fire districts. The county has been paying for those dispatch services for as long as I've been here, as long as I know. And I did a little historical research, and I found where it was discussed, and at one point, county fire was charging out to the different fire districts. That's a future discussion. And as I mentioned, in the revenue side, the 0910 Homeland Security grant revenue was put in, as was the expenses associated with that grant.
Shirley, the 53,000 for county fire, that's over and above the in-out costs.
Right. The in-out costs, we're talking about the $900 fee that goes into the water enhancement fund. That is only used specifically for water tenders, where we make the payments for the water tenders from that. But that does not and never was meant to cover the cost of the CDS dispatch contract, and that's about $183,000.
So the 53 is reflective of CAL FIRE's dispatch. I thought it went down this year.
It did go down, but we also have property taxes, supplemental property taxes that go into the county fire district, and then we have to pay out a certain portion of those to 3 of the fire districts that cover unincorporated or areas that have not been annexed.
Excluding Milton.
So it really, and we have, other land use fees that go into that, but with construction being down and what have you, those fees just do not support the cost of that contract.
Thank you.
So we can talk a little bit now about Prop 1A, the suspension thereof, and the securitization. As you recall, the state budget for 910 included the suspension or borrowing of Prop 1A funds from local governments. There were bills introduced after the state budget was adopted to clean up some of the language associated with that. Those bills passed the Assembly, but however, on Friday, there was a great deal of hope that SB 67, Senate Bill 67, would provide the cleanup language to ensure a timely and cost-effective securitization of Prop 1A. Excuse me. As you probably know, that didn't happen. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But what that bill allowed was, it allows for financing, to occur in November of 2009. It accommodates a tax-exempt structure for the securitization. It states that the California communities, which is JPA supported by this California League of California Cities, and CSAC, is the only issuer. And they are working towards a securitization. It provides for sales among local agencies, so if a county wanted to sell it or buy it from smaller districts, they can do that. And it provides flexibility on the bond structure. And as I mentioned, the Senate failed to adopt SB 67 prior to the adjournment of the current legislative session. Now, this had nothing to do with the bill itself. There evidently was 3 issues that concerned the Republicans, and with the exception of one Republican senator, they voted no on any bill that required a 2/3 majority. Obviously, this is a great deal of concern. Securitization was always a component of that July budget deal. The local agencies, cities, counties, redevelopment, had, assurances from both the administration and the legislature that the securitization would happen and that the bills, cleanup language bills, would occur. And it matters not only to local agencies, but to the state as well. As it's structured, if they had passed this bill, it would provide the state $200 to $300 million savings in interest and issuance costs. So they kind of were cutting off their nose to spite their face. But it creates problems for the state. It creates delays for the counties. Most of the counties and cities have incorporated with the securitization into their final budgets because they were assured by the state that it would happen. We have received numerous information in the last couple of days from CSAC, and there's a conference call tomorrow morning about this very issue. They are currently urging the Senate to reconvene to just deal with two bills, SB 67 and SB 65, and SB 65 is about the highway users tax. The worst case scenario, this is adopted in January when the Senate reconvenes, which means a delay in the issuance of the securitization and a delay in counties getting their money. Because if it was securitized in November as planned, the counties would receive their money in January and in May, which is when payments to the state is due for the Prop 1A. So what are the benefits if we can go ahead and securitize, which it appears we can, it's just a matter of question of the timing involved. The financing will be offered by California Communities. They have a good track record in this area. They did the BLF securitization a number of years ago. They've done trans. They really have a good handle on that, and they are moving forward. They have all the information out on their website, and they are asking the counties and cities and other agencies that are interested to continue moving forward as if it's going to happen. The local agencies, local governments will receive 100% of the property tax reduction. There is no cost to participating agencies. All interest and issuance costs will be borne by the state. So basically, we get all our money up front, and we don't have to worry about anything after that. Participating agencies have no obligations once the bond is issued. That's between the bondholders and the state. And there is no credit exposures for the counties. It won't show up on a credit report anywhere. So what are the impacts of the borrowing by the state to our county? The general fund, as we mentioned, proposed budget, we'll see a reduction in property taxes of a little over $1.5 million. Roads, about $80,000. Airport, $1,100. And county fire, close to $30,000. The one thing we have done with final budget, it does anticipate the securitization of the Prop 1A in order to balance the budget. As you recall, when we presented the proposed general fund's budget, it included contingencies of a little over $1.5 million, and we told the board that this included what was needed should the state decide to suspend Prop 1A. At that point, they hadn't, so we had pretty much felt they were going to. The board did allocate of that $1.5 million contingency, $618,000, and that was to keep the branch libraries open, to keep the archives open at a reduced level, to restore the funding that we had taken out for the Visitors Bureau, and to fund certain positions that were to be laid off. And if you'll recall, they involved 2 dispatchers, an animal services officer, $50,000 for a deputy district attorney, .6 office technician for the farm advisor. I'm sure I have the rest, but But that was put back into the budget, and it reduced the contingencies down to, I think it was close to $800,000.
But the ones in public safety, that's entirely different.
It is. And speaking just exactly to that issue, Supervisor Callaway, we applied, we met and agreed with, came to an agreement with the public safety bargaining units. And we did that with the application of about $454,000 in AB 443 funding, VLF proceeds, and we combined that with the contributions the public safety units agreed to make. And that restored, of that 600 plus thousand, it restored 215,000 in the public safety personnel costs that were previously funded from contingency. The net result of that was a deficit of a little over 400,000 when Prop 1A was suspended. So with the securitization of Prop 1A, it will balance the 910 final budget because it will provide the funding to compensate for that $400,000 deficit from proposed budget. It will offset some of the other reductions in revenues that we talked about. It will allow for a $200,000 general fund contingency, and it will transfer almost $760,000 into general fund reserves. While this will allow us to pay this year's bills with this year's revenue, because make no mistake, it is property tax revenue from this year that the state is borrowing. And it will also set aside funds for future years because we still think we're in for a few more difficult years because the economy will be slow to rebound. Just a little touching on some of the other budget units, non-general fund, public works, roads, and I just kind of took some of the bigger ones. The cash carry increased by a little over $2 million. Revenues decreased and appropriations increased. And when we do the budget hearings, department heads can talk to and answer any questions regarding this. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, Senate Bill 65, which accelerated the repayment of the highway users tax, was not approved, and hopefully when the Senate, if they will reconvene to deal with SB 67, they'll also deal with SB 65. Integrated waste management, their cash carry increased a little over $800,000. Revenues just increased minor $18,000 in appropriations because they always have to go to a zero budget. If you add the cash carry increase and the revenue increase, that's what the appropriations are going to increase in pretty much any of these budgets. Public health, the same thing. Cash carry showed an increase of $365,000. Revenues $415, and appropriations increased by $780. And what you don't see, just because in these numbers, are with public health, mental health, and substance abuse, they do have money set aside in contingencies that are included in the appropriation increase. Again, whoops, sorry, it looks like when I was changing things, the number kind of slid to the bottom. Cash carry for substance abuse increased by $46,000. The revenues decreased $198,000, and therefore the appropriations had to decrease as well. With CalWorks, their cash carry increased almost $300,000, while revenues decreased and appropriations increased. And as their letter to our office stated, they are not expected to receive their allocation letters until mid-October. So once they have those allocations in hand, they will be looking again at their budget to ensure that they are living within their means. And that's about it at this point.
Any questions for Shirley? Supervisor Walensky.
I'm interested in the reductions in the behavioral health of 151,820. Is that coming out of substance abuse programs? What are the cuts that we anticipated to services, and what are the expenses that might be related to those, to making those cuts?
I'll let you answer that.
Good afternoon, Jeannie Boyce, Director of Health Services. On the substance abuse side, the cuts were the Prop 36 funds. We typically get an annual allocation of about $295,000. Those funds were the state general funds. They were totally eliminated. We have some prior year savings that the state is allowing us to keep to the tune of about $25,000 to $30,000 that we've budgeted. The state budget deal included some backfill of some federal funds called BURN funds, Justice Assistance Grant funds, others known as JAG funds, that are intended to allow substance abuse treatment providers to follow more of a drug court model for treatment, but to backfill that loss of Prop 36. It's a 293 versus 156. It will still require cuts to our services. We have had 2 counselors resign with the incentive, voluntarily separate. We have proposed in this budget a reduction of a 1 FTE counselor to a .60. So we are having bigger groups. We may have waiting lists. We had to eliminate some of our funding that funds job connection literacy and just rely on those providers to provide those services for our referrals. So we are looking at doing things somewhat differently. We had to eliminate the funding for probation that funded a .80 FTE deputy probation officer as well as part of a clerical staff. We funded them through September. We were able to do that with prior year funds. So we kept them in the budget as long as we could. Now, they also were backfilled with some promised federal money, which they also are waiting to hear whether or not they're going to receive that money. As of last Friday, we heard that the burn funds, which were about $156,723, are hung up in the state between an agreement with Cal Emergency Management Agency and state alcohol and drug programs, which have to work out some MOU, and they seem to be having a tussle amongst themselves as to whether or not they can work out an MOU and what these funds can be used for. So we are monitoring that, and we may have to come back and cut again. But at this point, we've anticipated that they'll work it out, they'll figure out how to fund treatment with the dollars that we have included in this budget. It's grim.
It strikes me that $151,000 saved by cutting these things out may have some effect, since there's been a decrease in recidivism through the drug court and to some lesser extent Prop 36. Mm-hmm. I just wonder if anybody's running the numbers about the saved, what we're cutting and then what we may be costing ourselves in increased costs in another budget line item if we have an increased or a decrease in recovery.
Well, we're still marching forward as we have with the money we have and hoping that we're going to hold on to that burn money. I know that our advocates at the state level that represent all the treatment providers have been banging on the legislative offices trying to really explain and have done a good job saying that treatment can save. For every dollar you spend on treatment, you save 3. I mean, they've proven that
right.
with the evaluations of Prop 36. But quite frankly, it doesn't seem to matter. I mean, we lost in the budget battle just like everybody else.
Well, this gets back to my thinking about not just passing on stupid ideas if it's going to cost us in the end more money out of our own budget, that it may make sense for us to, and I suppose not immediately, but at some point if we lose burn monies, I think we would have to evaluate what we want to do about it here.
Absolutely. I mean, we're keeping good tabs on our numbers, and we're monitoring the state discussions and doing as best we can with the advocacy to make sure that we get a hold of that federal money for treatment. And I know that the probation officers are also doing the same with a separate pot of money that they have that hopefully will help backfill their cut, because we're all part of a team. We work, our teams, CalWorks, probation, substance abuse, we work as a joint team with our substance abusing folks. So we're continuing to do business as usual, altered at this point, but we'll see what happens.
All right, please keep us
We will keep you
timely
informed.
informed. This is a big,
the Prop 36 is about a third of this budget. The prior year savings we have in this budget was really from some federal perinatal funds that were designated that the feds in the state allowed us to keep for multiple years, and we've been spending that on our perinatal outpatient. But there's not a whole lot of play in this budget.
thanks.
And I think it's going to be true for all departments and general fund, non-general fund to closely monitor budgets, as well as the CAO's office. And we'll be bringing quarterly reports to the board regarding the budget. We've done in the past mid-year in the third quarter. I think in the current situation, both with what we're facing, cuts at the state level, some of the unknowns that we're facing, it would be prudent to do a first quarter report as well.
Shirley, on the increase on final budget, page 4, I guess, page 4. The 4.9 million increase, you said was mostly in non-general fund?
Right, because if you look at the general fund, it was only $234,000.
So, kind of piggybacking on where just Steve's questions, then why are we having such significant cuts in our social services?
Well, I mean, if you look just at Public Works Road, their increase to their budget was because of a cash carry of $2 million, and they have to budget to zero. Appropriations increased nearly $2 million. Out of your 4.9, there, right there is made up a portion of it. The changes to the CalWorks budget at this point are reflective of their best understanding, but they're waiting until their allocations come in to fully determine and make possibly some significant budget adjustments, but they won't know the full impacts of those until October.
I mean, they've made significant cuts
Already.
already.
Right, and CalWorks have done their caseloads. They've carefully monitored and put forth on that. They are looking. They have looked at their administrative costs, and as you know, that they did lay off that proposed budget, and they will continue to monitor those as according to what the cuts are, and we will be having ongoing discussions with them on that.
One of, on the securitization, I'm not quite sold yet. And I'd like to see, I guess, a session just on the securitization, because the state, if they pay the closing costs or the costs, that's upfront now money, where if they do interest to cities or counties, that's future dollars. So, I mean, to the 200,000 and 300,000 that you had in here, which would be a savings, that's based on interest they would be paying for the cities, counties, and special districts monies that they're taking, right?
If counties securitize, they will be made whole. They will get whatever money the state borrows from them.
Right.
There will be no cost involved for the counties whatsoever. If a county or a local agency determined that they did not want to securitize, they would take that reduction in this year's budget. The state has 3 years
Right.
to pay that back.
I understand.
We don't know yet at what interest rate that would be.
Right.
It's a per annum interest rate. It is not compounded. It's not a compounded rate. So, and that's taking the risk that they can in fact pay it back in 3 years.
So, what this board has to decide, part of the decision for me, is what would we do with that money if we get it, if we securitize it. I mean, we could do, where Steve is and give it to Jeannie so she can reintroduce Prop 36, and then we start whittling it away, and then where are we? We have to make a commitment as a board.
And that's why the final budget that is presented to you next Tuesday has the recommendations to use a portion of that money to offset that $400,000 deficit, put $200,000 into contingencies, use a small portion to balance out the remaining adjustments to revenues and expenditures, but to put $759,000 into general fund reserves. And that's the commitment the board needs to make if they want to ensure that that money is available down the line to help through difficult years.
My homeowners association has $700,000 in reserves, and I look at the county and think, that's not even...
Currently, our reserves are $2 million. This will at least give us a little bit more in the savings account, if you will. And it allows us to pay this year's bills with this year's money, because this is, in fact, this year's money, as I said, and it also allows us to put about half of it away, because we know the coming years is still going to be difficult until the economy turns around. And we don't know what the state is going to do, further cuts the state's going to make, because we know that they are already looking at a growing deficit.
We're already looking at what?
They're looking, I've heard that the deficit, they were, was it $5 billion that the deficit had grown at the state? I don't remember.
Yeah, they're looking at about $12 billion to start next year.
Yeah. So we know it's not going to be good at the state, so it's our recommendation to use about half of it to make up that $400,000 deficit, so you don't have to close the libraries, that you can continue to fund the Visitors Bureau, that we can make up the difference for the delay in layoffs, we can make up the difference for some of the reduced revenues, that back and forth, and still put away half of that money, a little over half of that money, for future years should we need it.
A rainy day fund.
Because it could start falling.
Is this going to make Lynn Norfolk happy?
I'm sure it will, since she's advocated for it for a number of
I
years.
know.
You have a question, Supervisor Tran?
Yeah, I have some concerns on that, what you want to put in the general fund, the 759. I mean, there are years where we had well over $1 million in contingencies. And given the uncertainty surrounding this year, excuse me, I'm already losing my voice, it seems to me we would be wise to have a greater contingency rather than probably the smallest. I'm not sure on my 24 years here that we've had anything. I think every general fund contingency has been something greater than $200,000. I mean, maybe not, but if it's not, it's 20-plus years ago that we've had a $200,000 or even remotely near that number for contingency.
And that's true, Supervisor Tran, but also remember that up until the last couple of years, there's been very little draw on contingency. I think we range maybe in the neighborhood of $64,000 to $80,000 if you look over prior years. It's only been in the last few years when we had a sharp decline in construction costs, building permits, and the building department no longer became self-sustaining, and money was pulled from contingencies to balance, in part, that budget. Up until that point, until we saw some drastic reductions, not only in building permits, but in property transfer tax fees and everything else, that pulled and affected the contingencies, we rarely use contingencies. I think I rarely remember it breaking $100,000. So the money is there, and it can be drawn, general fund reserves can be drawn on at budget or in a case of a true emergency. So if we have a true emergency, we can draw on that with a 4/5 vote of the board. However, it puts it aside safely so it can't be easily accessed. We will watch the budgets every month to ensure that revenues and expenditures are where they should be. We will do the quarterly reports to the board so that you feel comfortable and you know where we stand at each quarter. And if we see a department going upside down, we can take the steps at that point to address the issue.
Is there a legal definition of an emergency to draw funds from general from general fund? I mean, not general fund. What am I saying?
General fund contingencies.
General
fund reserves.
The reserves, thank you. Is there a legal definition of what an emergency is?
There is. I left my book in my office, so I could...
I think you should get that, because I think we need to have a real discussion of what happens and what discretion's available to the board if it's in the reserves. Because if we have a meeting with Public Works here, I think the 6th of October, and if we don't get the, from what I understand, Tom's telling me, is that we're going to have some real decisions to make concerning snow removal, et cetera, particularly if this money, tax money, doesn't come, say, in January. If it, like the securitization, waits till a normal reconvening of the state legislature, which I understand is in January, then it doesn't come till spring. Well, you know, we may, if we know, you know, unless they can allow us to securitize our gas tax delay, we may have to upfront. Well, Jim took off. Okay, going to go get it now. We may have to upfront some snow removal money, at least within what we anticipate being repaid from the gas tax. We may have to, you know, I don't know. You heard Jeannie's comments and Steve's and Marita's. I don't want to put it where there is no discretion for the board for a year to draw on those funds. There was a lot of speculation earlier, and at the last RCRC meeting, the guy from San Luis Obispo, the county supervisor, who the minority leader of the assembly is in his district, and then I talked with Cox's representative, help me.
Dana?
Yeah, Dana, who I like a lot. And both of them were saying that they anticipate a special session to readdress the budget deficit at the state level sometime in the fall. So we could easily have some additional monies taken from us before the conclusion of the state budget or before the conclusion of our final budget. And it seems to me that we should, you know, allow a fair degree of discretion on the part of the board to address, you know, a changing financial situation. So I'm very leery of, you know, I mean, it takes 4/5 votes to take it out of the general contingency also, but it doesn't have the same legal requirements that go, I understand, with the finding of an emergency. We'll find out what that legal definition is, but it seems to me in some ways we should be retaining the board's discretion, not eliminating it. But that's my own thought. And I'll be interested in what the legal definition is for getting it out of reserve, because if it's a very narrow one, then I think we should give some real consideration as to what we're doing.
Okay, are there other questions while we're waiting for...
Well, Diane Gray was in asking for $2,000 today, and, and it was really extrapolated out to number 3, I guess Bob said. So it's $4,000. Does the board want to support
That's
another $4,000? Or $2,000 for this one.
For 2 sessions.
So there'd probably be another one in the spring, which would be probably another $2,000.
In this fiscal year.
This fiscal year, so it's $4,000.
Considering how little economic activity is going on, that would qualify as an emergency expenditure, I think so.
If it's the board's, direction, we can easily include it for, if you tell us today that you'd like to see that in the final version for next week, we can obviously do that.
Let me ask another question. It's my understanding that there is absolutely no money in the budget for for the board to attend any out-of-county meetings. Is that correct?
Travel for the...
Travel, thank you.
Have been put back into the budget there.
You put it back in?
It has been put back in.
So how much is available for board for?
The same, we appropriated the same amount as last year, I believe.
But we have to take a transit bus.
Yeah, but suppose you don't have a week to get there.
2,000 per supervisor.
Per supervisor.
Per supervisor, okay. And if I know Marita's going to have a fair need for a draw because she attends the CSAC annual meeting, and I don't know where that is this year. Is that north or south this year?
North.
It's in Monterey.
But it's, I have executive committee meeting, I have board meetings.
So hopefully we can move that around amongst board members. Like if I have some extra, I can pass it on to the meeting.
So don't spend your money, Tom, I'll borrow from it.
Well, what's sending it down to your CSAC
Use
meeting?
his, because he doesn't want to bother with the paperwork.
Just securitize it.
There is that flexibility to move it within line items.
Okay, esteemed legal advisor.
Are you still waiting for this? It's a fairly long list, so bear with me. 4/5 vote. A, upon the happening of an emergency caused by war, fire, failure, or the imminent failure of a water system or supply, flood, explosion, storm, earthquake, epidemic, riot, or insurrection. That's just A.
Can you define a town hall meeting as insurrection?
That's just A.
That's every Tuesday at 9 or 9:50.
A board chamber meeting is an insurrection, isn't it?
B, this should apply here, for the immediate preservation of order or of public health. C, for the restoration to a condition of usefulness of any public property, the usefulness of which has been destroyed by accident. D, for the relief of a stricken community overtaken by calamity.
That's the whole county.
I think this must have been adopted originally in about 1857, but, and then the last one is the settlement of approved claims for injuries or property damage. Oh, and to meet mandatory expenditures required by law. So those are the...
Well, I'm not so sure we should be looking at contingencies, which is still a 4/5 votes, but allows much more discretion if, in fact, the state reopens the budget or the gas tax gets put off the reimbursement till spring and there's not a securitization for it. I mean, I'm leery, given the financial uncertainty that both the county meets from our own revenue sources and the financial uncertainty with state actions, that we would have the lowest contingency in 2 decades or more. It leaves me very uncomfortable. What was the contingencies 20 years ago, do you know?
20 years ago?
4 years ago.
I don't know.
No.
But I think when
I've
Brent...
been here 20 years, but I don't know what the
when was Brent the
contingency
CAO? Because back then it was about 600,000, I think.
I have some really old budget books in my office. I probably could look back and find out.
But I don't think, I can't recall having a $200,000 contingency on a, what, $57 or $8 million general fund budget?
We ought to, in my mind, you have to keep that balance with how much have we ever expended out of contingencies. I mean, if I can see, going double what we normally do, but I don't know. That you had a comment?
Pretty much in line with yours, Supervisor. When we discussed the amount to allocate for contingency, I'd asked the Assistant County Administrator, well, setting aside what happened when we got involved in floating for the building department, and then this past year where we had a sudden increase in general assistance claims, which we have budgeted for this year. Setting all that aside, how much did we ever get into contingency for? I believe it was $100,000 or less. So you may have had a $600,000 contingency, but it wasn't one that was drawn down. We wanted to put as much money aside and earmark it as we could, and that's why we chose a $200,000 contingency this year, again, based upon previous expenditures as opposed to previous appropriations.
Supervisor Walensky.
To restate a little bit differently what I was talking about before, it strikes me that some of the things coming down this year as opposed to previous years have such a strong effect on things that might accidentally or unintentionally cost us more in a different line item. For instance, if Prop 36 falls apart, we have no leverage to get people into these programs and we're having to cut counselors anyway, the number of people that we will have to house in our jail will increase, and there will be costs far beyond the savings. At that point, I'm not sure that an allocation of dollars is possible from the reserves. It's not an emergency. It's just a foolish, penny-wise and pound-foolish move on the part of the state that we would be simply passing through if we didn't have some discretion to respond. I think that makes my comments consistent with Tom's on at least some part of this. I also agree that we need more reserves and contingencies, but that's not possible here. So my general inclination would be to try to up the contingencies by some, maybe splitting these in a more even fashion. But there's too many. We can't judge on last year or the year before what we're facing from the state this year, especially with the midterm adjustments that may actually take place here, or mid-year adjustments that the state might be contemplating. We really need to keep at least some of our powder dry for this year.
Would an increase in the number of jail inmates qualify as a calamity?
We have a cap. He's just, if we increase it at one end, they're going to go out.
It's full already.
Yeah, it's
They're already
full, so you're not going to increase the number of inmates.
Unless you're actually going to spend the money to house them someplace.
Yeah, we'll send them down to another facility at twice the.
Well,
who knows
Steve, the issue is if we securitize and
we'll release.
Steve, if we securitize and you want to take some of that money and put it into behavioral health, you can put
You've
that
got to get a
out there.
4/5 vote to do that. So.
Well, I know, but he has that option if he wants to take general fund money.
Before we
and put it in
finalize the budget, that's one thing we could do next week. But I'm presuming that because of what Jeannie's talking about here, that we don't need to make that decision until the other shoe drops, which will be later, out of contingency or not.
Mr. Lawton, go ahead.
Right, just for the convenience of the board, and I think we can probably move this a little bit closer to a conclusion. You can do whatever you want next week on a 3-2 vote. It's once you pass final budget that you move into the land of 4/5. Supervisor Tryon has recommended leave it in contingency for now. It will require a 4/5 vote anyway. The board will retain the flexibility not to be bound by the very narrow findings of an emergency. County administration recommended they go into reserves for a reason, to ensure that it would be money we spend. This is this year's money we're trying to put away for the future. But if it's something that would help the board move into 2009-10 with a little more confidence, certainly we can change our recommendation if it's the board's direction. If you want to make changes, have us make changes before this comes back for an actual vote next week, we could do that. I was originally not a big fan of securitization, but if we don't securitize now, we're not going to be able to securitize next year or the year after. This is kind of the window will slam shut on our fingers. We are not going to be in a position to go it alone to securitize if we don't get on the vote now. I am very apprehensive about not having access to these funds a year from now or 2 years from now, despite the interest we might receive at the end of the third year. The alternative would be for us to go back into the budget and find at least $400,000 of reductions elsewhere to balance the appropriations that were previously made to contingency. Administration stands ready to support the board in doing that if the board so chooses, but based on the hand we've been dealt now, I think we could very easily make a recommendation to move these funds rather than putting them all into reserves, put a portion of that into contingency instead. It would be good, however, for our discipline, for the county's discipline as we go forward, to get used to putting something in reserves every year, even if it's a token amount of a couple of $100,000.
Well,
That option that you just discussed about going back and finding $400,000, that was only predicated on our not taking the securitization. Is that what you were saying?
If you don't take the securitization, we will need to have a balanced budget.
Yes.
The only way for us to reach that would be to go back and find at least $400,000, which still would leave the board with then a zero contingency fund. That would just be to balance it, not to be fiscally prudent with that.
Okay.
And actually, it'd probably be a little bit more than that because of some of the revenue adjustments and the additional salary and benefit costs associated with the delayed layoffs.
$400,000 here, $400,000 there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money.
well, I disagree with Tom. I think there should be more money in the reserves. I don't think, and this is the contingency money, Tom, is that what you're talking about if we securitize? Or are you talking about taking some of this 759 and putting...
I'm a very strong supporter of securitization. We get 100 cents on the dollar back, and we don't have to worry about the creditworthiness of the state and its ability to pay us in 3 years. At the it was either the RCRC meeting or the CSAC meeting. I'm a little confused on this one, but one of the questions was asked by one of the members present. Well, what happens if we go to securitization, but we can't securitize all of it? And the statement was, the response was, so it must have been CSAC, because I'm pretty sure it was CSAC. And the response was, well, then it'll be pro rata. I mean, if you can securitize 90% of it, then you'll get 90% and you'll carry 10% forward, or 70%, or whatever. There's still sort of a question mark, it seems to me, around the creditworthiness of the state, because when we do the securitization, it's based on the ability of the state to repay, not the ability of the county to repay. This isn't a bond that the county owes back to the bondholders. We're just selling a receivable that the state owes us. So what we're selling is a receivable. The county has no requirement whatsoever to repay this. It is only the state of California. And so the question is, when it comes time to securitize and float the bonds, will they be able to sell them all, given the credit rating of the state of California? But setting that aside, you don't know what the credit rating of the state of California is going to be in 3 years.
But it's what it is now that will determine the marketability.
That will determine the marketability. They say they have a strong anticipation. They're being told by bond counsel, et cetera, that they would anticipate selling all, being able to securitize the entire amount of the Prop 1A. They don't anticipate that they will not be able to. But one of the reasons, seems to me, to do it is, a full dollar in the hand is more valuable than a dollar 3 years hence, not knowing what's going to happen to the economy or the credit rating of the state. So I'm a big fan of securitization. The second part of Marita's question, I think, dealt with how would we allocate the money, or how would I recommend the board allocate the money? And obviously we're going to have to pick up the what is it, $600,000 in additional costs, including those that the layoffs were delayed 2 or 3 pay periods. And so we have to pick up all those costs along with the libraries and the archives, and I don't know if it included animal control,
Yes.
Et cetera. And then we have an additional, so that comes to about $600,000. And then we have a $200,000 contingencies, which is $800,000, which leaves a little over $700,000 of the $1.5 million plus that can either go into contingencies or can go into general reserve or can be allocated between the two. My own feeling is, given the huge uncertainty, I've never sat in a budget year that's had anywhere near the uncertainty that this budget year has for the county, and to come up with the lowest contingency, that worries me. I would put the entire amount in contingencies. Realize it takes 4 votes to get it out, and hopefully the board will be very frugal in putting the money out there. But to take it away from the board's discretion in this environment, I don't think is appropriate.
So your proposal would be a $959,953, wait, $959,953 contingency.
Yes, that's what I would do.
I can't support that, but
You can't support that?
no.
In the alternative, might we split it something along the lines of a $450,000 contingency and a $509,953?
We don't even
move to
have the money
reserves?
yet, so it's really it's really mute.
Well, if we
because don't-
securitize, this is all on the basis of
It's
securitization.
not.
Securitization in January, and April, May.
But the securitization just becomes, in the
It's a
context of
budget.
this budget, it's a budgeted revenue. So
It's a
we are,
budgeted revenue.
just as we budget for
Sure.
grants or for state money, this just becomes a budgeted revenue, be expressed that way.
Would that close to 50-50 split be more appealing to you?
Well, Supervisor Tryon used it as an example of, what would it cost us if we have to front the plowing of the roads? What does that cost us? Is that
250,000, 200,000.
Okay.
273,000.
all right? Well, just for the sake of discussion, I would be in agreement with splitting it, yeah. But I think that we need to, splitting that puts 500,000 into reserve.
509,953.
I could
disagree.
support that. How about you, Supervisor Tuffanelli?
I'm in favor of splitting it also. I think we need to put some of it into a contingency, but I'd like to weight it more towards the reserves, though, because we don't know if we're sitting here this year, what's going to happen next year. But I don't think putting the whole $700,000 in there, not knowing if we're going to be able to get it, if we have some reason to do so, like plowing the roads.
That's
I don't
an
know if
emergency.
I don't know if that's a calamity there either.
Yes, it is.
It is in one district. In District 2, we'll live with it.
Okay, so you heard that, Mr. Garcia. You do not need to plow the roads in District 2.
So we're down to what, if it's 50-50, the $175,000 we need to plow roads?
No.
$150,000.
Okay, so we have,
Cash flow be in January.
She wants it all.
Would we have cash flow to do the roads in January? Or we would be short? If it were a matter of fronting in the current fiscal year?
The revenue, as far as securitization, come in December, we have to pay the state in January. If it's securitized, we get the money the same day that it's paid to the state, so there is no cash flow for securitization issues there. As far as the highway users tax, I'm not so sure.
Okay.
I guess my next question would be, although I think the Scenic Highway Commission, or Highway 4 up in Arnold, I think if we didn't plow, it would be much more scenic than if we do plow. And I care about the scenic qualities of the Highway 4 corridor through Arnold. My next question is,
nobody will be able to see it.
we're
Now that we've settled that.
without securitization, we have a $400,000 operating deficit with no contingency. So assuming we're not going to draw on contingencies early on, let's just talk about the $400,000. If in fact securitization is put off, and the money is not received in December or January, what funding source do we have for the $400,000 operating deficit?
Well, it will depend. We have some issues. If it's just a delay in the securitization
Okay,
of the funding, we have, as you recall, we did a training this year to help with cash flow issues, and that was to see us through as the property taxes came in. So if you're just talking cash flow, that can be managed. If you're talking, we're not going to get it at all, then we would have to come back to the board and make cuts
additional cuts.
to resolve that.
Yeah.
But from what we're hearing is even if the CSAC cannot get the Senate to reconvene and adopt this so that they can move forward with securitization in November, that when they reconvene in January, they will adopt the necessary language. Again, it wasn't an issue with the bills themselves that caused them not to be adopted before they adjourned.
There was a positioning for the overall budget.
The two-thirds.
It was outside influences that prevented them getting two-thirds votes that they needed, and it had nothing to do with the bills themselves.
Okay, so you're saying that we can fund that $400,000 deficit
As far
while we wait for
as
securitization to
far
take
as cash
place?
flow goes, yes.
As far as
Okay,
cash flow,
that's cash flow.
because you don't have to come up
And
with it all.
there's a big difference between the two. The cash flow will be dealt with.
Okay, I want to come back to this issue of the splitting. I think we had four supervisors that were willing to go along with
Anything
that.
that
So,
increases the contingency, I'm in
okay,
favor.
can you make that adjustment then for the 22nd?
Sure. You want to give us a dollar amount? so you-
Yes, it would be $509,953 for the reserves. This is splitting the $959,953 in this way: $509,953 in general fund reserves and $450,000 in the general fund contingencies.
On top of the 759.
No, that's allocating, it's reallocating
Taking the
total
two
of
together and then
I
splitting it.
It's taking the 200,000 and the 759
Yeah.
and then splitting them out.
I do not support that, so that's all I know.
Okay.
What would you support?
Maybe you go 300 and the
Increase 100,000.
contingencies. And the reason it's going to be as we go through the year, it's going to be it becomes very easy for departments that are already in a very difficult position to come in and see the server went out and I need $100,000.
They'd have to get the support of the county administrator's office
And,
before they did that.
You know,
And
I mean,
four of us.
I just look and see Howard because Howard's had to, IT's had to tap into it in the past, and I don't want to make it easy, and contingencies are much easier to tap into than the reserves. And this board's always been fiscally conservative, but we're in difficult, anyway, I'm a no on that.
You're a no. So at $300,000 contingency, if we spend $272,000 to support snow removal, that only leaves a balance of
Yes,
28,000
Yeah, for the rest of you.
for the rest.
yeah, and your point is?
Supervisor Callaway,
Well,
I mean-
the point is,
Besides, Mr. Garcia said that there's other funds that he could borrow, waiting for Huta to show up. So we're not talking about going to contingency or reserves for snow removal. That was already discussed.
that was discussed prior during,
Yeah, because we asked him if the highway users tax is delayed 6 months, or till January or February, can you get the money to come to do snow removal? And he said, yes, I can.
I don't recall it being that well cut and dry
It is.
in his answer.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's I'm a no on the split of 500,000 in contingency.
I'm not budgeting.
It's too easy to tap into that.
You're not budging?
Nope.
Nor am I. Okay. You've got your...
Tom, are you budgeting?
Tom?
Yeah, no, I'll support the compromise. I mean, that puts more in contingencies. I think we need more in contingencies.
And I'll support the compromise also.
Okay.
So my heart, of course, is with Marita.
Well, of course.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I have just a couple that popped up during the course of this discussion. Could you tell me again what the unitary tax at $108,000? What is that? The definition of a unitary tax? I don't know that, but
I thought it was urinary tax.
urinary.
Curie.
I always defer to the experts.
Hello, Leslie.
Hello, Leslie Davis, Acting Assessor. The unitary tax is the amount you get on the state-assessed properties. So essentially, think of it as the state assessment roll.
Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, darn, I should have gotten up. Is that what you're telling me?
Are they in arrears on any of those taxes?
State?
Yes.
I have no idea. Linda? No? Okay.
Okay.
No, as long as I'm standing here, though, I do want to give you the bad news that Shirley sort of floated over, and I just want to be sure the board
Unsecured.
understands the issue, because I am talking to school districts about this. Since we closed the assessment roll and started producing this year's roll, for the last 4 weeks, we've gone negative on the supplemental assessments. That is unprecedented. In 26 years, I've not seen it. That tells me that you need to predict a negative roll next year, and so you should be thinking about that.
About increasing your reserves so we can handle it.
That's not
gentlemen.
why I told you.
Well, I just thought I'd throw that in.
Well, if you don't spend the contingency, it too will be there.
There's a cash carry.
So when it comes to contingency votes, I'll be interested to see how you vote.
Okay. That was...
Back to the 4,000.
What is
Oh, the 4,000, the two and the two?
4,000, the direction was,
Of course,
We were what?
we were only asked for 2, I think.
We were only asked for 2, but Mr. Lawton was brought up the fact that there will be a Summit 3 in spring, and that's within this budget.
I'd like to see a performance-based approach to this, and that we allocate 2 this time and see if it's successful and that there really is follow-up in activity.
That's fine.
And that we then take a look for possible contingencies, should we have 4 of us.
Already spending
See, you guys are already spending it. Thank you. You want to change
Better
your
than to
vote?
spend it up front. I thought I was being frugal.
So it's now 507,000 in the reserves.
Well, if there's another...
I'd take that out of the
clear direction on the
reserve.
board, whether
Okay.
it's 4 or 2 or 0.
It's an emergency.
I would tend to agree with Supervisor Walensky that 2 is all we're being asked for right now. We can...
I agree with 2,000.
Okay, I have
I'm with 2.
Rated? All right, we're all good.
You with who?
No, let's see where we are. I mean, maybe we can afford that.
Well, that's...
Okay.
Everything comes down to
This may be a dangerous thing, but is anybody else out there willing to raise your hand to ask a question or a comment? Or Leslie's sliding down in her chair. Okay.
Howard, you don't have anything to say?
Looks like teeter funds for you.
Christine is representing planning and nothing.
Where's Christine? Oh, there she is.
Okay, if there are no other comments or considerations, I think we're done with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shirley.